The gospel is going to go back to Europe, I believe. Not gospel, but superpower status is going to go back to Europe. America, I do believe, is going to fall entirely. But there will still be power maintained in one of the countries that used to be a member of the Holy Roman Empire. But it is, like I said, fragmented. Today, the statue of Nebuchadnezzar has been fulfilled in that it's part iron, part clay. And so therefore, it should tell you how close to the end we are. Though I still think we have maybe like 200 years to go, but we stand corrected, I don't know. Okay, the stone that's going to come from the sky, that is Jesus, is going to establish a kingdom forever. But Nebuchadnezzar, his recognition that all of us that are given any kind of power to do anything spectacular for a season, unless we acknowledge God, we're ash, we're moot, we're hollow, and we're naught. Because God can bring you down at any minute. So Habakkuk, do not cry, don't lament. Why do the wicked prosper? The wicked will prosper until they just can't anymore. And when the winepress of my wrath has reached a height, I will uproot them through yet more wicked or righteous structures. I can uproot the wicked either through a righteous force or a wicked one. But seeing as the road is narrow that leads to life and only a few people find it, righteous nations are going to be hard to come by when they conquer wicked nations. So nations largely will be conquered if they must be brought low by other wicked nations. And it is going to be in only rare instances where a righteous nation is used by God to to conquer a wicked one. For the grander majority all throughout history, wicked nations are going to conquer other wicked nations in order for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. So if your nation is helped along by a righteous country, feel blessed, because then you're not going to be so upset as Habakkuk. But why will the wicked prosper? You will remember, because I've been looking up quite a bit on South Korea, that who do you call this? What you call this? Japan wreaked quite a bit of havoc in South Korea's life, and America helped them. And America at the time of helping them was a righteous nation. So you are blessed when you are helped to conquer what in that moment is an evil structure through a righteous one. Because then, as the people that are being helped along in this regard, what's going to happen with you is you're going to be left to do what you want to do. And to be strong as a country, you're not going to be merely taken. You're not going to have just a change. You're not going to have just a mere change of regime. You're going to be awarded independence. So all that nations can pray for when they're enduring oppression is to be rescued by a stronger but righteous nation. Because strong, righteous nations award independence, whereas strong, unrighteous nations take tribute and they insist on their own way, like Frank Sinatra. And in so insisting on their own way, one of two things can happen. They can either allow you to maintain your national identity but understand you are my colony, or tell you that unless you honor my nation's way of doing life now, you're not going to win. So if you are conquered by a nation that takes tribute, all you can pray for is that they let you keep your religion and your culture, but honor the king of the new structure. Because this here option is giving Kim Jong-un. It's just forcing a regime down your throat. It's giving Xi Jinping. If I'm going to conquer you, Taiwan, you're going to be a communistic country too, and you're going to worship the state. So that's why Taiwan is out here looking at China on some, don't come at me, because all the freedom of religion that we have here in Taiwan and just our leg room, we're going to lose it if you come on board. And you're going to surveil us and give us also a surveillance state, a social security state like what's going on in China. And breathing room is going to be hard to come by. I don't want to do it. We don't want to do it. Leave us alone. We're an independent. We're quite happy to be that thing. But who in the world right now today is allied with Taiwan, essentially staying China from trying to do the most? It's a nation that I can't call them righteous anymore. But America is unlikely, if at all, that helps Taiwan in this feat should China go against Taiwan. It's not going to take Taiwan over as a colony. It's going to give them independence again and let them do what they want to do, but also put their military base over there or whatever to protect them from attack again or whatever. Pretty much like what they did for South Korea. So you need righteous countries to fight causes of smaller nations that are bullied, that will, upon helping the cause of the bullied nation along, it's exactly like what's happening also now today with America concerning Iran, with America concerning Israel. If a nation is bullied, the US has in history gone in there to help the cause and then left them alone to run themselves independently on their own terms. That's what a righteous nation does. That is what a righteous nation does, but they're hard to come by in history. Righteous countries that will fight for you and then let you be and keep your independence as a country. Like, just fight so that you can come free. You're not gonna, it's hard to find countries like those. So therefore, when they're in power, you need to pray for them to stay in power, which is why the world needs to pray for the US. Though they're losing their minds. Like I said, a nation loses its strength when it starts to allow other infiltrators in that space to erode away at their national identity. It's happening in America today. It happened in Britain. It's happening today in the UK. It is something that is just maintained on a going concern. It's a downward spiral. And if there is no staying force preventing it from finishing its course, goodbye, empire. Let's see what's coming next. And let's hope that what's coming next looks more like the Medo-Persian Empire than it does look like the Babylonian or even the Assyrian. So Habakkuk's sorrow that, oh, but why do the wicked prosper? God ultimately fulfilled it in Cyrus. Yes, fine, the Babylonian Empire prospered to devour you as Judah, but it's because you were wicked and in rebellion to me. Even Jeremiah gave them counsel that respect Nebuchadnezzar because he has been anointed by God and the Lord. If at all you honor him and pay him tribute and do what is right, you're not going to lose your country. But Nebuchadnezzar ended up destroying even the temple because of what I believe the name of this king guy was Zedekiah, because of the betrayal by Zedekiah. So Nebuchadnezzar was given leniency, but leniency is not clemency to the country at large. He gave them leniency, not clemency. He did not give them immunity. He did not give them diplomatic immunity. He gave them leniency. If a king gives you leniency and you betray it, he can just rip you apart. So Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple and he took the goods in the temple, exiled God's people, and left only a small little remnant over there to do what they want to do, as basically a show of power, that you don't get to disrespect the living daylights out of me. There would be one essentially righteous nation that God did raise up, though the men and the women over there were not godly. The king was yet again, just like Nebuchadnezzar, anointed. He was called of God, and now he was specifically labeled. His name was mentioned. King Cyrus of Persia. When he came to power, he repatriated the Jews. He gave them resources to rebuild their temple, their wall. Persia was so righteous towards Israel that the following kings that would come, one of them would marry a Hebrew and be used to stay a genocide against the Jews through the man of Xerxes. But Xerxes was not the most, he was like a puppet on the string of cunning men. He changed his mind quite a lot of times. He was just easily swayed. Yeah, it's what I'm getting at. Xerxes was made to sign a decree against the Jews. If he wasn't married to Esther, they would have died. He went back on that, of course. Well, he didn't go back on it. He couldn't because, Persian law, once signed into statute, you can't reverse it. So he allowed the Jews to stand up for themselves. And then later on, his scribe, Nehemiah, asks for permission after fasting for a couple of months to go and rebuild the temple. Not the temple, but the repatriation happened through Cyrus. Xerxes comes later, and the city, Jerusalem, has no walls. And in the Bible it is written that a city without walls, a person without self-control is like a city without walls, because no walls suggest that anything can come in and just wreak havoc, right? So that was problematic, and Nehemiah prayed and ultimately sought Xerxes after seeking the Lord, and Xerxes gave him permission to go and build a wall. And it was under King Xerxes as well that the temple that was in progression of being built. So they finished the wall, thank God, but they stopped the building of the temple because herein lies this king that gets swayed, right? This king that gets swayed. Xerxes was swayed to stop the rebuilding of the temple based on some historical archives that were in the Persian storage house that basically showed that, remember Zedekiah that went against Nebuchadnezzar, even though he placed him, Nebuchadnezzar placed Zedekiah in the king position after taking Jehoiakim, not Kim, but Jehoiakim, the son of Jehoiakim, as a eunuch into Babylon. And then he placed his own king, Zedekiah, that was not from, Zedekiah was not a Babylonian, he was a Jew, but he was essentially like a pawn, a patsy of Nebuchadnezzar. If you do what is right, I'll leave you alone. When the guy goes and allies with Egypt at the expense of Nebuchadnezzar or Babylon, and then Nebuchadnezzar is like, what in the world? And so he gets upset, besieges the land for a couple of years. They starve and eat each other. Ultimately, the walls fall. The siege engine succeeds. Zedekiah loses all these children. His life is spared, but his eyes are plucked out. And then Nebuchadnezzar does what he does with the Jews. He takes up Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and takes them to Babylon as exiles, right? That whole thing that Nebuchadnezzar did, he did it because of Zedekiah. And these things are chronicled. And herein lies the people that are very jealous about the building of the temple. In the regions, I can remember the Jews were repatriated like the Nigerians have been taken back home after South Africans xenophobically afflict them, the Ghanaians, after repatriation. Of course, during the season of exile. I mean, here's a land and there's houses here, so people occupied them away. Where did they come from? They're Canaanites. They're surrounding nations. They took the houses of the Jews and they lived in them. These people that were foreigners living in the land of God, mixing with whatever Jews were left in this town. Of course, when then the Jews get repatriated to their country, they're going to get jealous and they're going to get scared and they're going to get nervous. And initially when they were rebuilding the wall, they wanted to help them build a wall, but they were like, no, sorry, you're not God's people, you're not allowed to build a wall with us. And so they got hostile. And so they gave a whole bunch of grief to the Jews for rebuilding the wall, right? And then Ezra takes on a project to build the temple. Yenale, I believe, Zerubbabel, right? And through, now that would be later on with Darius. Zerubbabel and whatnot and Ezra would be later on. I'm speaking now about the rebuilding of the temple through which prophet? Listen, I think it was Zerubbabel. He was in the line of David, so he could have been a king, but I guess the dynasty was over at that stage. But he was the closest thing they had. And then there was, is it Ezra? Listen, I know Nehemiah facilitated the rebuilding of the wall, and he caused a reform. And Ezra was the one that caused the people to give away their foreign wives, etc. The temple was commenced, and which priest there was a priest, I forgot the name, that in the time, a prophet, which prophet was it? Was it Micah? I stand corrected. A prophet later on basically rebuked the Jews for sitting around after 16 years of the temple kind of sitting around gathering dust. And that's how they ultimately got to cause King Darius to remember the decree of Cyrus. But listen to this, I get they scribe everything, and they preserve them. This king, who just loves to listen to scribes reading him stuff, is the very same one that ended up awarding Mordecai in the book of Esther. This is the same king that ended up awarding Mordecai in the book of Esther, like a signet ring and chilling on a donkey and going through the towns to be celebrated for saving the king from being killed. The king of which had forgotten that this happened, and then one day he can't sleep at night, God troubles him, and then he gets his scribe to read him a chronicle. And in these chronicles, he finds out that there's a guy by the name of by the name of Mordecai, right? He finds out that there is a man by the name of Mordecai that rescued his life. And he then gives Mordecai this like excellent honor. Of course, upsetting Haman, because it was to Haman that he asked for the suggestion as to what to do for a man whom the king wants to greatly honor. So the guy likes to hear scribes read him chronicles when he can't sleep at night. That's like Xerxes. That's the character of this guy. And so loving to just have people read him chronicles, and then him not in retrospect, but in prospect, frankly, like ultimately, then making a decision as to what to do about what he's reading in the chronicles, then acts. So earlier, he acted rightly towards Mordecai and gave him honor in the city square. But later on, the same guys, being cunning and just pernicious and under the table, knowing that this king of ours, if he can just hear from a chronicle, read from archives, something that the Jews did, we can use him to essentially do what he always does when he gets a scribe reading him chronicles, change his mind or make a decision, decree something. And this time we can get him to decree the cessation of the rebuilding of the temple. And remember Zedekiah that betrayed Nebuchadnezzar. That story was chronicled in Babylon. And these people that wanted to stop the building of the temple, they couldn't get them to stop no matter what, because there was the decree of King Cyrus, who now was late, and his like descendant, like I think son, Xerxes, was running the show. They now are nice and jealous, can't get them to stop, want to try, have a hard time, get even violent with the man. But the Jews are just building. And then one day they're like, listen, we're going to go to Xerxes and tell them that these people have a history of rebellion, and they have a history of trying to stage a coup against the king. Look at what they did in Babylon. There was this one guy by the name of Zedekiah. There was this one guy by the name of Zedekiah. That's how they ended up in Babylon, by the way. We took them from Babylon. Yeah. We found them in Babylon. But why were they there? Why? This Babylon that is now our empire. You will remember the reason they were in Babylon was because the king of Babylon was nice and lenient towards them, but then they decided that they want to do their own thing. And their king ended up allying with Egypt against Nebuchadnezzar because he was tired of paying tribute and tried to stage some kind of like coup. And that's why he lost his eyes. Listen, it's in the chronicles. So you can't let these people build their temple, because once they get strengthened and have bravado, they will do exactly what Zedekiah did to Nebuchadnezzar. You give them leniency and they spit in your face, these people. That's what they say. And Xerxes, Mr. I get swayed by chronicles. As I'm sleeping in bed while my scribe reads them to me, he was read these chronicles by his scribes, verified the accusation of these jealous saboteurs, and was like, you better stop all activity of temple building right now, because I'm not going to have these people come at me like they came at Nebuchadnezzar, not over my dead body. Now, at this time, listen, this man is married to a Jewish girl. Purim came and went. And despite everything, despite Nebuchadnezzar, not Nebuchadnezzar, but Mordecai, really good guy, despite his wife Esther, despite every miraculous thing that he has experienced through these awesome Jews, he then decides to just take at face value this stuff, even though there was no history of such, even though they were not, what is the word I'm looking for, man? Seditious. Yeah. Even though they were not, they had never staged any kind of insurrection or act of sedition against, in particular, Persia. They'd never done that. They had never done that before. Only Zedekiah in his rebellion in Babylon, and frankly, he paid for it. And also, according to Jewish prophecy, they were predicted to endure that judgment from Babylon, even through the prophet Jeremiah. And that was a judgment by God on them. So if Xerxes had done comprehensive research and found out that the God of the Hebrews even predicted that as a result of their insurrection and as a result of their sedition towards Nebuchadnezzar, that they would endure being exiled to Babylon, he might have not done this thing. But he just ran with this one side of the story and caused the cessation of the building of the temple over there. And it would be 16 years that would progress when they would then commence again the building of the temple through this time around Darius. And Darius, I guess, Persian kings love chronicles and like archived stuff based on, again, the decree of King Cyrus, recommenced and also funded yet again the finishing off of the temple, the building of it, and also like hooked up a decree, also raised a decree that anybody that tries to stop it will face death by impalement on a pillar in their own houses that would be uprooted. So they just stopped. They didn't anymore stand in the way and sabotage the building of the temple. But that whole thing that happened over there caused, but if at all, that which happened with Xerxes didn't happen, the people of God, the whole structure of repatriation that was commenced by King Cyrus would give us the best model of what happens when a righteous country or a nation that has been raised up in the spirit of righteousness comes to the party to save a beleaguered people, an afflicted people. Repatriation, renationalization, the allowance of them to build their synagogues, their temples, their places of worship, and also to rebuild their cities unfettered, even financing such activities as those. So that's what happened then in Persia. But so it was essentially a restorative vessel used by God. It was a restorative axe used by God on Babylon, that which likely a man like Habakkuk would not lament against, because the Medes were not regarded as a hostile force against the Jews. They used to have a very, like the Jews and the Hebrew and the Persians, Iran, historical Iran, they had a very good relationship because of kings like Xerxes, kings like Darius, and kings like Cyrus. But of course, Xerxes glitched and he twitched along the way and stopped a project. But initially he had enabled the survival of the Jews through Purim. That was Xerxes. So every last one of those Persian kings had something beneficial to add to the lives of the Jews. So they were used positively as a vessel of honor. You know, the Lord has set apart everything for its purposes, including the wicked for the day of trouble. So I spoke all that. I know I can meander and I tend to go about the bush quite a lot, but I'm getting to the point. A nation is built on regard for foreigners, however, with putting one's foot down on their own culture, I guess, which is the reason why even Xerxes stopped the building of the temple, because his culture was threatened. His country was threatened by foreigners that he had given leniency in his kingdom. But a nation falls when you allow either the infiltration of foreign culture into your culture to a point of losing your own identity, or when you are just too harsh towards foreigners. These two things keep a nation strong, or they make it fall apart. And however long it takes for that nation to fall apart. The Assyrian Empire was violent. It took a minute for them to get brought low, but they ultimately got brought low because they were what? Too violent and intolerant. Who is this? Antiochus Epiphanes caused the fall of the Greek Empire. Because what are you doing? That mammoth fight that the Jews went, listen, I don't have enough time here to speak about that intertestamental period, but essentially the Jews succeeded. This guy who walked into the temple of God stole jewels. Well, he stole like riches. And then later on, because he wanted to systematically destroy the Jews and religion and cause complete integration into Greek culture, because he figured that we need to strengthen Greeks as much as possible because the Romans are a massive threat to us. The only way that he imagined that this could be done was by causing everyone to be unified under Greek gods. And there were very many of them, and the Jews are monotheistic, we know that. Because of their rejection of this and him feeling threatened, Epiphanes, this guy who called himself God, by just the strength of character and the strength of resolve and conviction of the Jews, he systematically tried to eliminate the religion from the face of the earth. And of course, he was fought by the Hasmoneans, who then later on started a dynasty, but anyway, whatever. And they were not supposed to start a dynasty because they were Levites. This one Hasmonean tribe that was living in the jungle, in the villages, was supposed to essentially agree to eat pork and sacrifice pork at sacred altars. And this village, one of the priests there, rejected this, facing death. But one of his people in the village tried to sacrifice to the Greek gods and I guess eat pork. And he was killed by this man who had, I forgot how many sons, I think 4 sons. And then after they killed the official, this man and the official from the Roman Empire, they ran away and started a most glorious revolt, revolution against Hellenistic terror. And they won, and they won. and they won. One of his sons, the third one, his name was, I think, Judah, and he was like a military beast. He was called the Hammer. Look at that, sounding like Thor. Yeah, and this Hammer guy used the strategic advantage that they had. A strategic advantage just in terms of a home ground. They had territorial, geographical location advantage, even though they were vastly outnumbered, and they succeeded to eviscerate Roman soldiers. They succeeded to eviscerate Roman soldiers from the cleft of the rock. Essentially, you will remember, again, there's just so much going on. In the book of the book of Obadiah. Obadiah out here prophesies against Edom. On some, y'all gazed at the Hebrews getting destroyed by the Assyrian Empire, and you laughed and you cut them off and you gave them back, the fugitives, to the Assyrians when they tried to run away. Now you're going to be destroyed. But what was the pride of Edom, according to this book? According to Obadiah, the fact that they were built into the mountain. They were built into the clefts of the rock. So they had aerial advantage. Therefore, anyone that tried to impede their city, they could just shoot them full from a distance. And so no one could ever come up against them. I guess that's why the Assyrian Empire did not succeed to overwhelm Edom. But, I mean, they were infiltrated from the inside out, weren't they? Maybe they had alliances with Assyria. They did. And they were destroyed anyway from within because their friends got close that were actually frenemies. And that's how Edom was judged. But you see that whole model, Edom, where they were built into the rock. It is ironic because the Edomites were ultimately destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth by infiltration by friends, like frenemies. They died that way. They were eliminated that way. Their empire was destroyed. But the very model that they prided themselves in like fortifying them from beleaguerment. I mean, if you build your empire into rocks, there is no siege engine, no encampment of another country's forces that will ever win against you. For as long as from within your establishment you can perch sentinels and archers at any threat coming at you, they will, on any given day, be brought low. And this is what Edom prided themselves in, that we can get to anyone that tries to come at us, but anyone that comes at us, we can't get to them. Therefore, numbers were irrelevant insofar as you were part of the stone, if you were part of the rock, if you were part of the mountainous terrain, no one can win against you, even though you are significantly outnumbered by the myriads of men coming from other armies. I guess that was only in the days of weaponry that can only reach a certain distance. And now in the era of ICBMs and guns and bombs and drones that fly by themselves, suicide drones, it doesn't matter when you're in a rock. It doesn't matter when you're in a rock, but in the days of samurais and archers and swordsmen, if you're in a rock, you're good, okay? You're good. Well, the Hammer, otherwise known as Judah, one of the sons of the Hasmonean Levitical priest, he staged a military campaign that was like that of the Edomites. And it's ironic because the Edomites tried to completely eviscerate from the face of the earth, finish off through the Assyrian Empire in their spitefulness against Israel when they were getting devoured. But the Assyrians, they tried to get rid of them altogether, and they laughed when they were being afflicted. And now their model of military strategy was given in the intertestamental era. I guess era was almost right, area. In the intertestamental era, the Hasmonean brothers and tribe and warrior men that staged the revolt against the Seleucids, one being significantly outnumbered. I get it, they were coming up against Antiochus Epiphanes. They significantly routed and defeated men that tried to destroy them from, it wasn't the Roman Empire, it was the Seleucids, who I don't think were Roman, they were Greek. They conquered and won, do you understand? By being in the rocks, because they had terrain advantage. And whenever the armies that would get sent by the Seleucid Empire to them to deal with them, to kill them, to execute them, whenever they would come in, I mean, the executions were brutal, okay? They just hid in the cleft of the rock, and it doesn't matter how many men there are. It's like the Jews at Warsaw during the Holocaust. They were in the buildings, and the Nazi soldiers that would come into Warsaw, they would shoot at them from the windows. But I guess that those were the days of guns and not so much swords and archers. So therefore, the Germans ultimately got to the Jews at Warsaw. But when you're elevated in a structure, no matter how many soldiers come in from the ground troops, You will conquer them, even though there's 20,000 of them and there's only 5,000 of you, because you come at them from the walls. You're in the cleft of the rock like a lizard. And that's exactly how it is that the Hasmoneans conquered the Seleucid Empire, essentially the Antiochus Epiphanic season. And when they finally won their independence, they tried to, of course, rebuild the temple, clean it, purify it, that abomination that caused desolation that was Antiochus Epiphanes putting a pig and slaughtering it in the temple of God. It had to be cleansed. There had to be, cleaning and purifying that space that was defiled before. But because there was so much destruction in the systematic oppression of the Jews, there was no oil for lighting the menorah, right? They call it a menorah. There wasn't enough oil to light the menorah for 7 days. They only had 1 day's worth of oil, and it took 8 days for the oil to be prepared using their rituals and whatnot. And they only had 1 day's oil, but nonetheless they made a decision to light that menorah, and it stayed lit for 8 days until the oil was ready to keep the menorah lit the whole entire time. And that was a miracle, and it can account for the holiday that the Jews have called Hanukkah. The menorah was lit for 8 days, even though they only had enough oil for 1 day. And that whole prosperity in getting theirs back was through the Hasmoneans, who were a band of priests from this one village. And as a result of, Judah died in battle ultimately, but two of his brothers then fought for authority. And because absolute power corrupts absolutely, these people who gave the Jews their faith back and won independence for the Jews again to worship as they wanted, though they were now still under the Roman Empire, who left them to do what they wanted to do. These people, these men, they then decided that they not only would function as high priests, even though high priests could only come from the tribe of Aaron, right? Only from the tribe of Aaron, though other Levites could serve as priests. It's like the combination of church and state, without separation. I guess they were the architects of it, if you will, where you are to mixing church and state. God separated David and the Levites. You will remember that guy in the Bible that during a celebration, the Ark of the Covenant nearly fell, and he tried to hold it, and it killed him. And David lamented to God that, Lord, now I'm scared to get close to you because I don't know if you'll kill me. I don't know what I need to do if you'll kill me. And he inquired as to, if my servant died trying to keep your ark up, what must I do? And so David went on a mission to find out what pleases the Lord, and realized that the only people that should handle the Ark of the Covenant are Levites. And so there was just mad respect, pretty much from the days of David, of the handling, not just David, I mean, even Aaron. Remember, he lost 2 sons, Jemai and Hophni, or are those the sons of Eli? But he lost 2 children as well, because of just acting awry in the temple of God, like doing strange things, being drunk, it is speculated, in the temple of God. So there's always just been this mad reverence for God, and Levitical priests themselves just were in danger if they acted awry in the temple, and especially in the Holy of Holies. And only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, and a high priest could only come from the tribe of Aaron, and other Levites did other work. And it was so dangerous a task that the high priest, upon going into the Holy of Holies, would have to have a bell on his foot as he walked around in the Holy of Holies, that he might be heard as alive and walking. And if he dies, there was a rope also tied around his legs so that he could get pulled out, because no one could just go in there, right? No one could just go in there, otherwise it would get struck dead. So if that bell stopped going, clicking, they figured the priest must be dead, and so they had to drag him out. That's just how God dealt with just abominable practices in his temple, and especially in the Holy of Holies. And Antiochus Epiphanes, who is the abomination that causes desolation, went into the holy place and sat in there, defiled it, and then slaughtered a pig on the altar over there. And that's what is now today called the abomination that causes desolation, a foreshadowing of another event of this nature that's going to come in the future. So they had to cleanse the temple, and after cleansing it, they had to light the menorah again that would have to be on perpetually, but they only had oil for 1 day. That was the only thing preserved in all the destruction of the temple. And God kept the menorah going for 8 days, 8 whole days. And then, listen, it was just a miracle. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So how in the world do you keep your country aloft when you stand against freedom of religion and destroy people's freedom to worship? God will pick a controversy with you, because in your country there definitely will be some of his people. There definitely will be, in the olden days, in the Old Testament, it would be Jews, but in the modern era, it's Christians. Anywhere where there is no freedom of religion, there will always be affliction on one of the religions on this earth that God caters to. Any nation that doesn't have a freedom of religion will afflict, of course, every religion but among the afflicted will be God's people. And if you come up against God's people, Seleucids, Diocletian, that was now after Jesus, after the destruction of the temple. There was a guy in Rome. Rome been out here at it for a minute. There was Nero before, and now there's this one guy called Diocletian, and he's like right-hand man called Galerium or Galerius or whatever. Systematic, whole-scale persecution of Christians, slaughtering them. But initially he was convicted, he had the wisdom to leave Christians be, especially considering his wife and daughter were Christian. But Diocletian, ultimately they convinced him to massacre saints, and when he did massacre them, it was whole scale. It was whole scale. He slaughtered God's servants. But in the end, the guy abdicated his throne, evidently felt uncomfortable about what he had done, because he was convinced to do it by Galerium or Galerius. Like, build a vegetable patch, tilled it. Like, imagine Hitler, right? Growing a vegetable garden, like potatoes and cabbages, at the end of his life, because he just wants to get back to what matters and what's meaningful after massacring 6 million Jews. It was too little too late. The guy wanted to just go back to simple living, to a point of abdicating his throne, and then later on farmed and stopped killing people. But it was already too late. He died in, I believe, severe regret, but he systematically massacred Christians in his Rome. The Christians of which in particular I believe were Catholic. But everybody was Catholic at the time. Remember, Martin Luther would later come with the Protestant Reformation, so Protestantism was not a thing, so pretty much all Christians were Catholics back then. He massacred them, and then felt like trash and like farmed, grew turnips and cabbages and tomatoes. Like, that's gonna restore you to God. And his Galerium guy died such a horrible death, the one that convinced him to do this thing because of his own mother telling him, I don't like these Christians, because she was a witch and she couldn't do her pagan practices. And they blamed the Christians for everything not working in Rome. Even Nero systematically whole-scale persecuted Christians because of everything not working. Of a building burning in Rome somewhere. And they blamed the Christians and then massacred them. Diocletian did the same thing. Not Diocletian, but Galerium, I guess he wanted to convince Diocletian to persecute Christians when he didn't want to. He just wanted them to obey his country's laws or whatever. But Galerium was just he had a woman in his ear, his mom, telling him these Christians need to go. They succeeded to convince him that everything we try to do, all of our rituals with our pagan gods are not working because of these Christians. Diocletian was still like, no, but we can't kill them. Don't persecute, don't kill them. Just like, try to subdue them, try to handle them, try to manage them. But then one day, Galerium, who was very influential, did something. He caused a disaster that then was blamed on the Christians. It was his way to just catalyze what he imagined needed to happen with these Christians. And this here event that happened, and I believe it was also a fire there too. This fire was blamed on the Christians. Look at Rome out here, emperors, or their right-hand men starting fires and then blaming that fire on Christians, and then ultimately Christians die because of a fire they didn't start. Diocletian did the same thing, and at this point then Diocletian agreed to massacre Christians based on the report of his right-hand sidekick guy Galerium. And at the end of his life, his whole empire fell apart. His tomb became a cathedral for the worship of God, and his right-hand man Galerium died such a horrible death where his body was smelly, teeming at the folds with maggots. He had worms inside his body and out because he was extremely judged by God. And guess what he did? He asked the Christians to pray for him, and just before he died, he sent out what would be the tantamount of an executive order, because he ran to Diocletian got this guy to be like a right-hand man they had two different empires that they were running, and he just gave the one empire was given to the one guy, and then Diocletian was on this side. On his side, he decreed that all Christian persecution must stop because of his disease, and then asked Christians to pray for him, and he died anyway. I don't know if he died saved, but he died with worms in his body. And Diocletian went farming after his main man Galerium died like that. He himself also slowed down, realized that this wasn't even his idea, but he followed through with it anyway. Went on to plant vegetables, and lived to severely regret what he did, because his wife and daughter, who had to flee the country and were murdered outside of the country by the systematic persecution of Christians. Listen, patron saints of the Catholic Church, a lot of them came from this era. After all that, he tries to take a leaf, but it doesn't work, and the situation was so dire that he abdicated his throne, gave it over, something that had never happened in Roman history before, to some other guy, and then went to the villages to plant some turnips, and then died. That's what happens when you eradicate freedom of religion. Your country doesn't thrive. It falls apart. Let people be who they want to be, but put your foot down to maintain your culture. And Diocletian and Galerium forgot that, or I don't know if it's Galerium or Galerius, but his right-hand man, they lost the plot. Nero lost the plot. Anybody that's going to persecute a religious group or religious groups, anybody that decides to take away the freedom of religion of any religious group or religious groups, like they literally did a guinea pig experiment on an initial sect of people that had a heretical version of Christianity. And when then they successfully persecuted them with little ramifications for their kingdom, they then took it out on the Christians too. But in the end, like I said, dude abdicated his throne and planted turnips and died having lost his wife and daughter to his regret. And his main man got worms in his body and sent out an executive order to stop persecuting Christians because he understood that God was the reason why what he went through happened. The Christian community tried to number their calendar on this event, but another person came later on, and I believe it was Eusebius of Caesarea or what, that decided that no, we need to number the calendar. No, Eusebius was alive at the time and gave stories of what happened in that season. But there was another Christian that rocked up. I forgot his name. You will know who he is if you're any kind of reasonable historian. He came up with the Anno Domini calendar on some, no, we need to venerate, we can't have our memories as Christians be rooted and count our calendar on this here horrific persecution of us. We need to basically take it to who matters here, Jesus. So it was at the basically the BC AD calendar was then used rather instead of that one. And we're grateful for that, because who wants to remember the world's age based on the most horrific systematic persecution of the body of Christ in history somewhere? So I mean, look at the mistakes of men like Diocletian. Look at the mistakes of men like of empires like the Seleucids and how they fell apart after persecuting the Jews. Look at the prosperity that God gave a small number of Hasmoneans, and look at the fall of the Hasmonean dynasty after they decided, again, David was scared to touch the Ark of the Covenant. So essentially there was a separation of church and state, separation of David and the Levitical priests. The Hasmonean dynasty had no sense, had no business being a dynasty, only a line of priests, but they wanted power. So they frankly made themselves high priests in temples, even though high priests were only supposed to come from the line of Aaron. And secondly, they made themselves kings. And at one time, there was a man who was both a priest and a king in one sitting, when even the king is an Uzziah that went into the temple to try and sacrifice to God and was stopped by the priests in there, but didn't stop. As soon as he walked in and did that abominable thing, he got a spot of leprosy on his forehead, and then the rest of his body was snow white because of trying to be a priest and a king at the same time. And Uzziah was a righteous king, with that, however, folly in his step. So mixing the Levitical priesthood with the kinghood that can only come from the tribe of Judah is erroneous, but the Hasmonean dynasty was exactly that thing. There were a bunch of Levites, a family that started out alright, started out heroic, that however made themselves kings, albeit not being from the tribe of Judah. And they also took on the position of course they were priests, that they could do, but within limited capacity, they however made themselves also high priests. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's how the Hasmonean dynasty, well, it fell ultimately. Like, these things happened all within the intertestamental era, the Maccabean era. They succeeded to fight a fight, but the corruption in that space was rejected. They became very tyrannical. They became oppressive as kings because they were not even supposed to be kings. That's the thing. That's what happens. It's what happened with the Catholic Church that ended up murdering men like William Tyndale. If you are going to ignore what the word has to say about how you ought to be, anyone that tries to basically correct your stance because you are in error and divorced from what the word has to say about how you ought to conduct yourself, given that you are powerful and have taken a listen, you're both the Hasmonean dynasty made themselves a judge, a juror, and executioner in one fell sweep. I mean, that is like absolute power that corrupts absolutely. And so therefore, people that read from the word of God, the Torah, and who looked at the tradition, and they were like, but you're not from the tribe of Judah, why are you a king? And people who were like, but you're not from the tribe of Aaron, why are you a high priest? They were just killed. They became violent towards their own people. So the Hasmonean dynasty, they started off well and had all excellent men like the Hammer, Judah, the son of the Hasmonean initial priest guy that was a righteous man. Their brothers and their offspring going forward, they were so evil. They were judge, juror, and executioner. And like I said, stuff like that. It's exactly what's happening with the Catholic Church. They made themselves judge, juror, and executioner, and they ended up killing William Tyndale and John Huss and men like these. They became judge, juror, and executioner because they refused to look at the word and say, oh, I can't be this thing. Because they were gunning after power. They were megalomaniacal. Anyway, whatever. What I'm trying to get at, in so giving bits and pieces of the intertestamental era and all the eras over there, the success of Alexander the Great and how his generals fell apart. His generals, among which were the Ptolemaics, who maintained more or less his model. And then on the side were the Seleucids, who caused the revolt because of trying to eviscerate Judaism from the face of the earth. They fell apart. And then from their place, the Romans, of course, took over generally. There was still the empire that reigned and ruled, but a sub-ruler were the Hasmonean dynasty. And they were also used, these Hasmoneans, easily by, who is this guy? They were easily used by the Roman system. The Romans that were running the show, they had their hand in it. So not only were the Jews Hellenized, they were Romanized, they were just a lot of, but the Jews had, like, they picked quite a controversy with Rome. We know all the way in the days of Jesus, that's why you got zealots, people that are out to just be killing people, because they were trying to eradicate Judaism from the face of the earth. But there was already quite a spirit, a very hefty spirit of rebellion or resistance against structures that are trying to do away with Jewish customs, because people had already, like, the trauma of the pre-Hasmonean era. They had the trauma of Antiochus Epiphanes. They also had the trauma of the Hasmonean dynasty. They had the trauma of the breakaway of the Pharisees and the Essenes. They also came up in that season, who went to the mountains because they realized nobody worships as they ought. The breakaway as well with the government patsies, otherwise known as the Sadducees. They were tired, and so they became zealots. And they were tired, and so they became zealots, and so being zealots then just killed. In order to basically maintain faith. Anybody that was like a Roman spy, a Roman saboteur, or a Roman patsy, a Roman sucker, anyone that accepted Roman authority, the zealots just sliced and diced them. And one of the disciples of Jesus Christ was a zealot. His name was Simon. And he was won over for decency later on. But he was really, really, really very, like, hot and bothered for maintaining Jewish culture. So if you try to destroy a nation's nationality, a nation's identity, if you try to destroy this, your country is facing revolt. As a cooing structure or as an occupying structure, you're going to face revolt if you try to eviscerate the nation that you're occupying. If you try to make them forget their God and their culture, you're going to face revolt. If you don't love that foreigner, you're going to face revolt. And if you don't put your foot down, you won't face revolt. You will face infiltration. You will face stealth. And you will face calculated tactic, strategic, eventual overcoming, like cooing. You will be cooed, but with stealth. You will wake up one day and find that the majority of your country is made up of some other thing that it wasn't originally. And by then it's too late. Or there will be little silos of wars happening on the ground because your people are upset that their culture is being overwhelmed. I spoke all that and my voice is sore now, and it's 1:21 in the morning and I don't want to be here forever and a day. I'm done speaking for hours on end. I need to go and take a shower, I need to eat, etc. I want to seal this message. I feel like I've given myself sufficient comfort, so I'm ready now to maybe speak for the last stretch. South Africa, you're falling. One, because for both reasons, but especially for one, you hate the foreigner. The fall of this country is the hatred of the foreigner, and the fall of this nation is also the disregard of what it is that makes it what it is. Remember earlier, there's like a Diocletian force in this country. You're not going to make it, you're not going to win, you're going to plant vegetables and turnips, pumpkins in a felt. But it won't matter because you're going to die after your right-hand man has got worms in their body. Remember when I said earlier that we are the rainbow nation, we are a very diverse country. Unless a person speaks in a foreign country, unless they respond to you by saying por favor, like they're that guy from Mind Your Language, you're not going to know that they're from Spain, because anyone could be South African in the street. So therefore, this ought to be among the least racist countries in the world, just by mere virtue of how diverse it is. And yet for some strange reason, there is an excruciating amount of racism in this country. First, it was around in apartheid, and now it's around post-apartheid by the very people that were afflicted in the days of apartheid. Blacks are now afflicting whites. And I'm not going to labor on that because I spoke about it at length very many times. Across multiple days, weeks, years. Well, let's rather say weeks, months, years might appear a bit of a stretch, but it's been years. Yeah, I've been speaking the same thing in my old ministries. And if you have interest at your leisure, please go check them out. Look at them at your leisure. All right. But this country used to be racist against essentially coloreds, blacks, and Indians. Now it's blacks in particular that are racist against whites, and everybody else is apathetic against this what used to be Cold War, now gone hot. And this Cold War has caused a lack of camaraderie on the part of a people who are called a rainbow nation. It has caused defeatism at a scale, a height that is just unfathomable to calculate, where herein lies a minority group of people in this country, and by minority I mean just in terms of size and not so much importance or girth. The smallest number of the smallest little single demographic in this country, white people, saw it fit to, thanks to the harassment that they have endured at the hands of black people, albeit even though they're in a minority, the most amount of wealth in the country. They saw it fit to disregard everything that has to do with, listen to this, the biggest single demographic in this country. So we are on opposite extremes in terms of our size. The nation is made up of all different kinds of races, but largely blacks, Indians, coloreds, and whites. Diverse and mixtures of this through mixed race couples. So you get people that look just as exotic as you will find any Arab in this country.